Right, so as Darlene mentioned, so we had prepared this generally to talk mostly about law offices, but there's quite a bit that's relevant for any type of office. And we wanted to focus a lot on what we learned during the COVID-19 crisis that could be a long-term benefit to your real estate. And you can see this is a second session of the June 4th presentation. Just to give you a little bit of background, I'm the managing principal of HYL Architecture. Been doing law firms for more than 30 years, and as I said before, we stopped counting at 35 law firms. It's a bit more than that. And I'm being joined by Carissa Lair from our office, who is an expert in space design for wellness. Just a few of our clients. We've been in business since 2014, but had worked together for many years prior to that. These are the clients that we've been working with just in the last 5 years, and we have a lot of current work on the boards with these clients. And we've been talking with them about what their strategies are in their space, what their concerns are, and trying to gather some information about what's really relevant in the office of the future. So a lot of the information we're sharing with you today is based on understanding what some of our clients are already doing and what their concerns are. So if we think about when we come back to work, there's 3 phases. There's the immediate return to work, and then a near term, which is the second phase, and then the long term. And even though jurisdictions may say that we're moving into a phase 2 or a phase 3, the way that companies actually come back to work may in fact be a more stretched out version of this type of sequence. And so we may see that this near-term principles last a little bit longer, and that what we're really going to focus on is planning for the long term now, because we have learned quite a bit in the last 8 weeks, and that those principles could apply to how you take space in the future, particularly if anyone's got a lease that's coming up soon, or an opportunity to change your real estate footprint. So let's talk a little bit about what we're going to focus on and what we're not going to focus on in this session. We call evolving data sets anything that's really specific virus related for the COVID-19. There's a tremendous amount of information out there that is available from the CDC. There's actually a great paper on return to work published by the New York Bar, for example, that's specific for law firms, has some very task-oriented, like, for example, how to handle notarization and that type of thing. So there's a lot of very short, immediate tasks that are recommendations for back to work that are available from other places that we're not going to rehash here. The other thing about this is that they continue to evolve, as we're seeing even with some of the information that came out that changes some of previous recommendations, even as just as a few days ago. There's changes to some previous recommendations. So we're not going to go through all of those things. We will provide at the end a list of sources that you can go to for some of these immediate health and virus-related activities. Also, I do want to mention that if you have a question, there is a Q&A feature here. You can go ahead and use that to ask a question, and at the end, we will pull up the questions that everybody asked. So, what we are going to focus on is the known data sets, which is how we responded to the COVID-19 working over the past few months in a remote way, and how that changed some law firm operations for the future in a more permanent way. The other thing we're going to talk about is how the existing research, which is well vetted on wellness, will have an impact to the space design in the future. So we want to also reference a big study that was just published recently, just in last month, and it was done by Major Lindsay in Africa and the Above the Law Group, which is an associate survey. And this survey asked a lot of questions about associates' readiness to return to work And we thought that this was really good information, and most of them did think that this would result in permanent changes to the law firm industry, and that the changes that they referenced most often were about remote work policies and how much physical office space, or that configuration of your physical office space, and how technology is used. So all of these things are physical properties of the workplace that are a potential permanent change to how you're using the space, not just something that's addressing a short-term requirement. So let's talk about the big topics that we plan to cover today. We're going to go over teleworking and hoteling, how to handle administrative and support space, paper files and print reduction, technology for collaboration, how to handle contract attorneys, and then finally, designing for wellness. And designing for wellness is a little bit, highlighted here is a different color because all of the items in blue are really operational, and the item in green here is more of a holistic view about the workplace. So starting with the teleworking and hoteling. So most people most of the associates on the associate survey said that they felt like they were equipped to work from home, and they felt like those teleworking policies would change. They also had a difference in experience on whether or not it was distracting to work from home if they happen to have young children who are also out of school. But we know that when we do go back to work, and things like the school's schedules go back to a more normal schedule, that those same people who reported it was more challenging to focus at home may in fact benefit from a telework program. So what our clients are saying and asking us about are, how can we take advantage of what we've learned about teleworking in order to actually reduce our footprint? So we've learned now that it's viable. You do not have to be in the office every day, and why should we carry all of this space? So we are helping people to come up with the right ratio of space sharing. So the first thing to consider is how you're going to assign those spaces. And this has a lot to do with your culture, and it has a lot to do with some of your space protocols. So you're going to assign people to their spaces, or are they going to let them choose from a pool of spaces is really the number one question. And so we want to also consider then what you would support those operationally with planning protocols, and then providing some spaces for other type of activities for people who do not have a private space, like making a private phone call, for example. So just to kind of go over what hoteling really means or could mean in the instance of a law office. So right now, this graphic is just illustrating the current situation where you have one person, one physical office space, and this is really addressing the lawyer population. We'll talk about the overall office in just a minute. So if you have one-to-one space assignments, these spaces are here whether this person is here or not. In a hoteling scenario, you still may have a lot of people, or the majority of people, that are in the office and get assigned their permanent workspace. But say you had a certain percentage of that population, call it 20%, for example, that might be out of the office 3 days or more, which really frees up a space to be used by someone else. That person can then move into a different type of space. It might be a smaller space, or they can share a space with another individual. You could also use a strategy of assigning people, if you wanted to continue assigning space on a hierarchical manner, where a partner, for example, who wants to telecommute, might get an office that is the same size as other attorney office, but it happens to be located away from a window and it's maybe a less desirable space. And there's many law firms that do this already for retired partners. So if we take it another step, you want to look at possibly having an assigned hoteling space. This might be an office that's either shared on different days by 2 individuals, and those 2 people are assigned to that one space. Or an office, we'll show you a photo of it in a minute, that is designed to accommodate 2 desks. And so one of the other of the people might be in at the same, at different times, but they also could occupy that space at the same time and each have their own private space facing away from each other. And then further than that is sort of an unassigned hoteling where there's a pool of offices available. Some of them might be on the window, some of them on the interior, some of them smaller. And all of the lawyers who are hoteling might choose from that pool or might be assigned to that pool by an administrative personnel. And so this is could be considered something's a little bit more chaotic in the realm of being a lawyer. You might be wondering, well, where do I keep my items? So there's going to be a few other logistical issues that are accompanying this, such as providing people with a dedicated storage space somewhere in the office, like a locker, file drawers, that they can retrieve their items when they're in the office, if that person is struggling with becoming more of a mobile worker. So then the next step, and this applies to both lawyers and staff, is maybe there's a pool of people, and it could be a combination of lawyers and staff in different departments, could be people from the IT group, marketing, whichever groups they are happen to be in that location, and those folks can then all choose from a pool of available offices. This is much more the model of professional services realm, places like Deloitte or PwC that have been doing hoteling for quite some time, use the choose from the pool method, and that they have very strict protocols for how these offices are set up and configured so that people can immediately plug in their laptop and be productive and right out of the gate. So what could happen if you did start to implement these? And we start with, what a lawyer space, because that's usually the majority of personnel at any given law firm, is that you could, if people were to work 2 to 3 days a week, and maybe you say it's, between 15 and 20% of the lawyers do this, you could save quite a bit of real estate. And this also depends on what other groups are participating in the hoteling. Just to show us a few pictures, this is the example that I mentioned earlier of a space shared by 2 individuals and assigned. So those individuals can keep their items in the space. They have a wardrobe, they have files, everything can be locked. But, and when this, if this person's not in one day, this person gets the whole space, and et cetera. These spaces are typically not configured to also be a meeting space. It's really more for the private heads down work. Just showing that in comparison to a private office, this might be an office that's shared and assigned. And then this is a view of a smaller office. It's only about 75 square feet, so it's half the size of a typical lawyer office. And then this is showing something that is a different type of space that could be used either as an office or as a meeting area. It's slightly larger. It's about 15 by 15, which is the size that we've seen of, historically of partner size. So in addition to that, there are other types of spaces where people can do their work. If you think about having a more mobile workforce, they can also work in places where they're getting coffee or breakout spaces by meeting rooms, and these spaces can be either enclosed or they can be open. You could also have more of an open plan area that could have temporary spaces. Again, as we used to be working just earlier this year, there were quite a few firms that needed space for visiting attorneys. And so what people are thinking now is that there's less travel and that those visiting attorneys are probably going to be using a different type of space when they're in the office. And so these, if they're coming into the office, they become part of that hoteling pool. And if you aren't going to be getting as many visitors, then your telecommuting population can use those same type of spaces. So now moving then to administrative and support departments. Starting first with legal secretaries. In what we found and have listened to a lot of our clients recently is that the legal secretary position was a challenging position to keep busy during this remote working time. Many firms were already trying to reduce the amount of secretaries that they have in their staff, and were aiming for even as much as a 1 to 10 ratio. But in what we found in the COVID crisis, when people were working remotely is that many of the functions that were generally performed by that administrative assistant when they were in physical proximity to the people they were supporting were no longer needed. And some of that was like booking a meeting room or booking travels wasn't needed as much, et cetera. So many of our clients had been experiencing attorneys who wanted to have their administrative assistant sitting right outside their door, and that this was an important way in which the secretaries were configured, and sometimes configured in a team of 4, as this is showing, or maybe a team of 2. You can see surrounded by offices here. So what some of our clients are looking at is potentially relocating this group of people to another place. This does not have to be on the practice floor anymore. It could be in an interior area. It could be on a different floor. It could be part of an administrative floor. It could be in another building. It could be in another state or country. So people can support from anywhere. And we do know that some of our clients, even pre-COVID, had, for example, a pool of 5 secretaries who supported 75 associates. So we think that this position is going to be really restructured, and that this is as much an HR and operations issue as it is a space issue. For other types of administrative staff, we're seeing people look at maybe changing the hours of the business and people staggering their time and work because there's now a lot more, just a different view about what is a flexible work environment. And that many groups can work sometimes entirely remote. And then, of course, many firms already had satellite offices. So those satellite offices are being used for additional staff, or may even implement some type of teleworking system. And so there may not be a need to have a huge presence of administrative departments in the office in a basically in a central business district where there's a premium on rent. These are just showing a few areas where legal secretaries are combined into teams, and these teams now, of course, could be anywhere. Moving into paper and print reduction. So obviously a lot of people had lost their access to print when they were remote, or they printed on their home computer, but they certainly weren't using the copy room. They certainly weren't using the large multifunction devices on the floor. So we think that this is going to become more of a habit. Especially as people are working more remotely, they will be wanting to not carry around paper back and forth to the office. They'll be keeping more of those files digitally. So as a result, I think people are going to be looking very hard at how much space they build into their office and repurposing some of the space that they have. If they have large file rooms, we anticipate that those are going to be reduced. And that not only just because it doesn't make sense to carry the space and pay for that space, but because it is better in a disaster recovery type of scenario that all of the material that people need to access is available online, so that they can get to it and keep work going from a remote location, even if they have no way to access the office. We are also seeing that this may change the way we design furniture for all staff, and this is true across many of our clients, not just law firms. We may be reducing or eliminating some of the storage components, paper storage components in particular. This may lead to a more cost-effective way to develop furniture standards. Some of our clients are thinking about potentially even eliminating their on-site copy center and getting that as an off-site outsourced kind of element, and then having, if the limited amount of things that they do print, delivered to the office instead. So just looking at what does this mean for space? So if you have a large file room now, and this footprint could become, a series of offices, or it could become some type of touchdown spaces, smaller offices, and a collaboration space, or something that is almost like a internal co-working type of suite. You have workrooms now. A lot of people still do have workrooms and war rooms in their space. that this type of space could also become a collection of offices, either 4 offices. Every single one of these is shown as the same footprint. And then, of course, depending on how your space is configured, you may even be able to give back some of that space and shrink the overall footprint. So talking a little bit about technology for collaboration. So as we mentioned earlier, there's a huge reduction in travel, and there's a big increase in virtual interactions. So in the office, when people are in the office, it's going to be even more important that they're able to interact with each other in impromptu ways. If you can, or if you know you can work from anywhere, then there needs to be a really compelling reason to come back into the office in collaboration and meeting with your colleagues and running into them casually is that main reason. So what we see happening is that people are sort of strengthening the infrastructure and improving the tools in the office so that people can work anywhere and supporting that mobile workforce. We're also seeing that there's a bigger variety in the types of collaboration space and the technology options. So for example, going back to a telecommuting lawyer getting assigned a smaller office space, if we're stripping out the meeting component of that office space, and we know that that person is coming back into the office partially to do some heads down work, but a lot of it is to do the type of interaction and going to in-person meetings, we need to replace that meeting component somewhere else in the office. So that could be in a smaller collaboration room like this, or it could be in a casual setting. In the short term, and we have had people ask, should we even build a conference center? Do we need our conference center anymore? But we do feel that formal conference rooms are still going to be used in the future. They just may be a little bit less dense. So we're seeing that places that are planned maybe for 16 seats may in fact only have 6 or 8 in them. And have more people calling in remotely, which is going to put that a little bit more pressure on having a more robust and high-performing technology in the office so that everyone feels like they can really participate in that meeting. And that we are also seeing this is, as I mentioned, like some huddle rooms or type of casual meeting areas that people can access if they are not going to get the same large office that they were used to having. And these are just a few examples from some of our recent projects that show the types of spaces that can be used for these collaborations. Some places maybe a cafe that has some booths. You could actually use some of those as a meeting space if you don't have that meeting capability in your physical office. Or having some place that's right by, a drop-in meeting room right by where you get coffee, or somewhere in the floor. We have seen that rooms with this type of configuration depends on the firm's culture, of course, but in the right culture, a room with a lot of collaboration like this is extremely popular. And then the ability to have kind of a standing meeting or a seated meeting on higher stools, looking around and being able to focus on something that's presented up on the screen is the type of collaboration that we are seeing more people gravitate to, and this is also true in the legal world. And then you could also have like a 4th or 5th person or more participating virtually in a small, more intimate team meeting like this. So contract attorneys, there's always been a big difference in how firms handle contract attorneys. Some people have them scattered throughout their space in conference rooms that aren't being used. Some people have them on dedicated floors. Some people have them in different buildings. And some of them consider them semi-employees, and others are truly thinking of them as an outsourced function. So contract attorneys, by and large, are seated in a very, very dense environment, almost like a trading floor. You can see in this picture in the background. This is the standard type of setup for something like that, and most firms are implementing a very small space. Sometimes there's a little bit more space between them than this, but typically it's about 5 feet. So we know that this is not currently compliant with the recommended social distancing. So we think there are going to be 3 different approaches to how contract attorneys will be used in the future. So on-site, We think that those who remain on site are going to be in a scheduled type of sequence so that they are not all in the office at the same time. There may be proven many more logistical issues in having contract attorneys work remotely, one for supervision and another one just because you're not providing with the same technology and tools as you would have provided an employee. So that does prove to be a bit challenging. And so off-site, you might make it more of the people who are providing that service. It's their responsibility to provide the location for that, and then the folks as attorneys would need to go to that location to coordinate with the contract attorneys if they need to do that in person. But of course, now that we've learned that we don't need to be there in person, you can also be on a call. They can provide a meeting space in with virtual meeting capabilities in the offsite location, and then they don't even have to come into your office, which reduces your visitor count in the office. And then a third approach we think we will see is a retooled workforce, which is that some of the activities that contract attorneys are doing may now be done by other folks in the office via a more robust training, so that you're using your own employees to do some of that work. And this might be something that you learned by, just wondering how much productivity your current paralegals were experiencing when they were working remote, and thinking that maybe this is something that you could retool some of your staff to do pieces of that work. So now I'm going to flip it over to Carissa Lair to talk a little bit about wellness.
Yeah, so thank you, Catherine. We're excited to be coming out on the other side of this pandemic soon. But one of the really big things here with wellness and the awareness of wellness is we know that in past, a lot of research has been poured into clinical environments relating to wellness. But really within the last 10 years, there's been a cultural shift where wellness research has branched out outside of the clinical realm and really turned to the corporate and office space realm. And there's a lot of great research that already exists on the wellness resources and tools that can be used to make for better employees and better businesses. But we know that that's not going away. We know that right now, all of us have this heightened awareness of our own health and well-being. And we have a heightened awareness of what the spaces that we're in, be that our home environment or be that the grocery store, how they contribute to our own health and well-being, and how are those surfaces being cleaned? How is everything reacting? And it's not just about clean surfaces, and it's not just about this idea that we're going to make spaces that respond to a clinical environment, but it's about thinking about well-being in total, and thinking about how we can design for better spaces, better productivity, better lifestyle in the future. And really we see wellness as the next amenity that employees and businesses will begin to offer as really a reason to bring people back into the office. So for example, that could mean a healthy snack and beverage program that's offered in the workplace that can't be accommodated for at home, or that could mean meditation and restorative rooms that are offered in the workplace that leave you feeling better than when you first arrived at the workplace. We also know that the office could be a place for cleaner air or better air exchange than you're currently receiving in your home environment. And these are all reasons that people would want to come into the office and feel that wellness is important and being accounted for in their future office space. We also know culturally that there's been a big shift. This work-life balance is pretty blurry when you're working from home, and what that means in the future is definitely going to change how we think of work-life balance and what that means wellness-wise for organizations. So whether it's offering different choices than previously were offered, or reframing the fundamental framework of what work-life balance means for organizations, we know that there's a cultural shift coming and already started around this conversation about wellness. And we know that more than just a cultural change, it's also the integration in the physical environment. So there's plenty of research out there about natural elements and biophilia and how it can reduce our stress hormones in the work environment. We also know that better air quality and enhanced filtration can boost cognitive function. So what kind of work environment wouldn't want that kind of productivity and increase in workers' function? We also know that daylight, you can see this statistic on the right-hand side here, increases productivity. So thinking about these systems in the physical environment is going to be really critical. It's a two-handed approach. It's this cultural impacts that we were talking about, but it's also the physical environment and how those can kind of create a complete package designing around our human health and well-being. So if we go to the next, there's, like I mentioned, there's a lot of research out there. Right now, what we're featuring on the screen is just two sources of where this research is coming from. It came about before COVID even existed. So we know that organizations like the International Well-Building Institute and FitWell have been doing a lot of research on how our human health is impacted. The two organizations have slightly different approach in how they have looked at the research in the past. So Well-Building is much more focused on medical-driven research, while FitWell approaches it through public health research. But these are two frameworks similar to how we've been having the conversation about LEAD in the past. These two frameworks really focus on human health and well-being. So they're certification systems if you're not familiar already. But just because your organization may not be pursuing a certification and may not want that credential at the end of the day, doesn't mean that the principles that are rooted in these different systems aren't valid, and taking the parts and pieces from them and understanding the research behind them isn't critical to developing a wellness strategy, a holistic wellness guideline for your future business or your future return to work. So we know that a lot of this research is out there, and we've been tapping in ourselves to understand, has any of this research changed post-COVID and what will change post-COVID? But there's already a ton of research out there that exists that helps to formulate conversations around what well-being could mean for an office type situation, and what that framework could mean in the future.
These are just a few photos of some environments that sort of integrate the natural into the workplace. We have found that these type of spaces are very popular for people or for different clients. They are like, folks really want to be in them. They feel good in the office, and it's part of like really making the office a place to be. But now we think that the focus is also going to be on making the office feel healthy, and to be able to have some type of reference point for what makes a healthy office that is shared with your staff, so that people are aware of the steps that you have taken in order to promote wellness in general. And that's the physical and the mental. So just to mention a couple of other things, we said at the beginning, we're not going to focus on a lot of the short-term things. We know that there is a lot of people, a lot of folks are focusing on the immediate return to work, and that includes incorporating social distancing, signage in the office of how to like navigate through the office, potentially doing one-ways. And you're seeing this obviously as in retail and other types of environments that are starting to open up or implementing this. A lot of information is available about that, as well as cleaning protocols and low-touch office space that is available at all of these different websites. In particular, we would say that to look at the OSHA website, the ASHRAE website has some very good recommendations. And then for law firms, very specifically, there's a pretty good detailed PDF that was written by the New York Bar. That was based on a committee work that they had of lawyers and other firm administrators that had put this together, that we think is very relevant. And then we've included, you don't have to write all these down, because you can just send an email and we can send this to you so that you can have all of the information that's in this PDF. So please just go ahead and write my email down and be happy to send that to you. It may have already come into the presentation here. All right, I'm going to stop sharing and see if we have any Q&A. Right. So let me see here. We have one so far. So do you think that offices will now have windows that can open to allow for more fresh air and space? So, that's interesting. I think that there are definitely some environments where you can open the window, but we have to balance that out with how do you control what's happening in the air quality? Because as you know, there's pollution outside the window, there's allergens, and that if you are able to close the window, you can control what's in the work environment, and that what's outside is not necessarily fresh air. I don't know, Carissa, do you want to add anything to that question?
Yeah, it's a really complicated question. Certainly our buildings were designed to shut out that outdoor air previously, and the idea of opening them back up, like Catherine said, is a really complex question to answer because of all the pollutants that are in our air system right now. But one of the things that is helpful and is reassuring is the idea that if we are telecommuting and we are working from home, there are some benefits on a smaller scale to opening up your home environment to outdoor air and fresh air. So perhaps as we think about reframing the number of days that we're in the office and telecommuting, we do it on a smaller scale, where our home environment is typically not in a place that has a higher pollutant count of outdoor air, but can be easier controlled. So perhaps not in a commercial environment, but would be curious to see if that changes.
Well, one of the things that we do see in our commercial environments, in particular in Washington, D.C., is when that they opened up the zoning requirements to allow more roof terraces, is that we do find that people are using the roof terraces as work environments. So for those people who do want to get that fresh air, that becomes part of the mobile workplace if they're happen to be located in a building that's offering that roof terrace amenity. And we are seeing that that is extremely popular now. And even if it's not for work, people going to eat their lunch there or having a social event, so that just having some ability to get some, to be outside at some point is actually really important. But whether they're going to change building design to allow operable windows, I think is a more complicated engineering solution. Are there any other questions? Okay. See if there's anything down here. Okay, well, if there's no more questions, then we can wrap up early. Thank you very much for participating and joining our call. And then if you have any further, if you need any further information, please be sure to send me an email. Thank you. Oh, wait a second, one more question. Sorry, questions popped up. Oh, just saying thank you. All right. Just want to make sure, don't leave before we finish answering the questions. Just thank you to JK Moving for setting up this webinar and allowing us to join you today. And again, thanks for participating. Let us know if you need anything else from us.